So I got some stories to bring to you today, including stuff about the Nintendo Today app getting an update that honestly should have been there at launch, but finally enables us to be able to actually share the news from their app. They're done blacking us out when we take screenshots. They're actually encouraging that we share stuff from the app to other social media platforms and our friends and family. So very happy with that. We also have this interesting thing with misinformation, and I actually partook in some of this misinformation in my video yesterday. However, I will note that I felt like the way I ended up trying to convey it ended up being pretty close to what the original intent of the quotes were. But we'll get behind it because it turns out it's actually a story dating back to October of last year. And we'll explain how it gets lost in translation, quite literally, and how these misquotes happen and thus misinformation ends up spreading. We'll talk about that. You guys know I hate misinformation around here, so I'm really glad we have some clarification on this today. And of course, hey, one of the big headliners today is Nintendo did something that potentially may, doesn't mean it will, but may indicate that some form of virtual console could be returning to a Nintendo platform, giving you an option of either a subscription service or buying these classic titles individually. Ironically, some of the misinformation actually deals with that particular aspect of Nintendo. It's kind of a wild one today. So before we dive in, I just want to remind you, we are giving away 3 copies of Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment and 5 copies of Kirby Air Riders. We have 2 separate giveaway links down in the description or pinned comment to click on to enter. And let's go ahead and dive into our very first story. This deals with the Nintendo Today app. Nintendo Today made an update to make it easier to share content. So Nintendo Today has recently been the preferred method by Nintendo to communicate its big new announcements, foregoing traditional social networks like X, although they do put it there just like a half hour later. Anyways, the app was updated for iOS and Android to version 2.0.1. And with this update, Nintendo has made it easier to share news articles from Nintendo Today with your friends by adding a share button. You can tap the share button with Nintendo Today news content to share it. And yeah, I actually tested this out. Shared something on X today. I just shared the Close to You trailer. It did work. It did function exactly as I expected it to. And I did go around on the app and take various screenshots that previously would be like blacked out. They're not blacked out now. So Nintendo has definitely reopened the application to be able to actually share things on social media. I think they probably realized Nintendo Today might have been slowly dying out with less and less daily users when people couldn't actually share anything from the app with their friends. Like, imagine you're buying a game, but you can't share any of the exciting things you're doing in that game with your friends. Imagine you bought a movie and you can't share anything from that movie. The point is that Nintendo needed to have a way for us to share the news and the literal images to other people, because otherwise you're just kind of creating this really super strict self-contained ecosystem where we can't build a community around it. We can't chat with people in it. We can't even share it with our friends through that app. The app's very limited to just Nintendo announcements and a calendar. So yeah, this is a good move for Nintendo. It should have been this way from the get-go, but you know what? It's always better late than never. Also, hey, we have an update to something else Nintendo's already released, and that has to do with Donkey Kong Bonanza and adding a new feature to the DLC. So Donkey Kong Bonanza will feature monthly in-game events with the DLC. So starting on October 28th, Donkey Kong Bonanza will feature in-game events on Nintendo Switch 2. Players who own the paid DLC, which is Emerald Rush, and have finished the main game story, so you have to have finished the story, can participate in limited time events to earn exclusive in-game statues. During each event period, players can tackle a special Emerald Rush challenge that shakes up the usual formula by setting some fixed conditions, such as the Emerald perks they can obtain from fossils and Banandium gems. When selecting an Emerald perk from 3 choices, the options presented to the player will remain the same during each run. Achieving the challenge's target scores will be rewarded with certain statues and Banandium chips, which can be exchanged for standard statues. Players can retry the challenge as many times as they like within the event period. The first event, called Chip Fever, will take place on October 28th at 8 o'clock BST until November 4th at 7:59 BST. During this time, players can smash their way through DK Island for a chance to collect statues of Ingward and Kong Bonanza. And this is obviously Kong Bonanza statue here. I find this interesting because I feel like these sort of event things would be perfect for a multiplayer game. maybe the one you launched the system with. Hello, Mario Kart World. Having monthly events with that would be really, really cool. Not just your little tournaments you do here and there. But that being said, I'm happy to see that new things are being added. This is just added for free. This isn't like another thing you pay for. It's included with the DLC that you might have already bought for DK Bananza. So I guess it just adds a little extra value to that $20 DLC. Now we got to talk about the Nintendo Switch 2 and in particular Legends ZA. No, folks, I'm not here to give any opinions on it. I am still playing Legends ZA. I'm still going to dive deep into it. You got to Wednesday, our podcast on Wednesday, we're going to have a topic about it. But we do have some initial sales data here. Well, I say sales data. We have no numbers. We have percentages, though. This comes from the UK. So UK charts Pokemon Legends ZA sales almost 50-50 across Switch and Switch 2. You see this comes from Christopher Dring. He says Pokemon Legends ZA is comfortably #1 in the UK physical charts. These charts have not been published yet, by the way. Launch sales are 40% lower than Pokemon Legends. So it is trailing behind Pokemon Legends Arceus. 51% of the sales, however, were the Switch 2 edition. So it sold slightly more on Switch 2 than it did on Switch 1. Now, I don't know. These are physical sales, so anyone who bought the bundle isn't included. Does that make up for the 40% sales being lower? That I don't know. Maybe it heavily skews to people buying it for Switch 2, but again, physical sales are not typically, including digital stuff, and that's a digital copy that's included with the bundle. So it is the biggest Switch 2 game of the year behind Mario Kart World, so it did successfully become the biggest launch for Switch 2 and done the best in the UK. So again, we don't have any actual sales data there, and it's just one territory, and we don't know how it performed anywhere else, but it is just notable to bring this stuff up. Next up, we have some... We're rehashing something, and we're rehashing something because there's a new interview that gives even more information on basically the Final Fantasy VII director defending game key cards. Always, this is controversial. A lot of people hate these damn things. A lot of people point to Cyberpunk being on them. I get it, but news is the news, and we got to cover the interview. So this obviously is an interview with director Naoki Hamaguchi, and it's actually like right in the beginning of the interview. So it says, in a recent interview, you talked about how Final Fantasy VII Rebirth will be on a game key card rather than a physical cartridge. Do you see Nintendo ever increasing the speeds on these Switch 2 cartridges so that this would not be a requirement in the future? And he responds and says, personally, I feel that the loading speed issue for the game cartridge is more about the hardware spec of the Switch 2. I'm not with Nintendo, so I can't really speak to that side. That said, I do feel that the game keycard format that Nintendo created for the Switch 2 is a really amazing new idea that they had offered for us. I don't personally see Nintendo working towards trying to improve the loading speed for the cartridges. Rather, I feel that Nintendo will put more effort into popularizing the game keycard format, which again is a really fantastic idea for us developers. Also, we hope players familiarize themselves with what that costs them. That obviously is something we can help out with as well from the developer side. I think that the collaborative effort between Nintendo and publishers to promote the game keycard will be the best way forward for all players in the future. It's rather interesting because we know Nintendo and these companies have talked about how they kind of partnered up and had conversations together to come up with the game keycard solution. And I think in this case, it's something that's just rather unfortunate. Gamers don't really seem to like the game key cards for the most part. I know some of you guys don't care. Look, I'm not here to defend game key cards. I've been critical of them as well, but I do think that they're going to stick around. And I do think for people who buy digital only, there is that benefit of them being more easily transferable. So there's that. I'm not actually one of those people concerned that digital games are going to go away anytime soon and the shops are getting shut down. You can still download every single digital purchase you ever had on the Wii. It's been more than 20 years. So I'm not that concerned about losing access to things I bought. That said, we hate seeing physical go away. That's really what this means. Let's get to the crux of why people don't like game key cards. It's not actually what game key cards do. It's what they represent. And they represent physical going away. We've known it for a while with game installs. We've seen it with digital only systems. And now we're seeing it with Nintendo. And it's just something that's a tough pill to swallow. That said, you know what's also tough to swallow? Misinformation. So yesterday, we covered a story about Miyamoto talking about movies and video games and all this stuff. And I kind of took the quote to sort of mean, well, I don't think he's literally saying the games go away, but maybe they're just not as relevant over time or something like that. And that has some truth to what I said, but really, the full context of this is interesting. So the interview goes back to a website called ndw.jp, but the interview itself is actually from October of last year. And the context here is it was about the Nintendo Museum. Okay, let's keep this in mind. And then we'll go read the quote here. We have the translation by Source Gaming here, and we'll go look at the original website as well just to show you it's there. But it says, with the expansion of areas like Universal Studios Japan's Donkey Kong Country and the growing number of people experiencing Nintendo IP, I believe the Nintendo Museum is an extremely effective way to engage 3 generations of families. What kind of corporate vision are you aiming for as you expand your IP going forward? Now, here's what Miyamoto actually said. We have character-themed exhibits along the walls of the second floor, and also feature characters in the welcome zone at the entrance to the museum on the first floor. Initially, this museum was primarily designed around showcasing past products and hardware. But to help people understand Nintendo as a whole, we decided showing them the IPs was the best approach. So, we created this space. Now we're operating it as a gateway to introduce these IPs and bring people back to Nintendo games, much like IPs, theme parks, and movies do. Looking ahead, while games are obviously part of the larger Nintendo IP brand, we envision creating even more compelling things. We hope to think of it as a space where all sorts of things can be incorporated. Ultimately, what people remember are the IPs. Games become obsolete when new versions come out, but that's incredibly sad. We started video production partly because of that sadness, seeing our creations become playable only on the virtual console. Even making them playable in a museum has its limits, but video content can endure forever. I envision more and more of these things accumulating, making Nintendo itself a huge brand. I always say our theme is creating reasons for people to choose Nintendo. I dream of a world where when a child enters first grade, the conversation isn't, what game should we buy? But rather, when you start first grade, we'll get you a Nintendo. So, very, very different than the story that was being passed around online yesterday. That was complete misinformation and fabrication. And there's a lot of reasons that this happens online. One, Nintendo's a Japanese company, so exact translations from Japan to, any other language is pretty difficult. But setting aside the difficulty of the translations, it's also because we talked about it a bit yesterday. There's a little grifting going on. There was pretty much no reason for this quote to be dug up by anybody from October of last year at all. And the reason that this wasn't a big deal back in October of last year is because the quote itself isn't a big deal to begin with at all, now that you have the full context. So I do find it interesting that people are now taking old interviews, taking quotes out of context that might be poorly translated and throwing them on the internet right now because people are going to believe everything and the stories are going to run and the headlines are going to get made and the clicks are going to come through. And really the whole thing is just a giant jar of misinformation and you won't see everyone offering corrections. Here is actually where the original interview came from, by the way, Nintendo Dream Web. This has been translated. This is actually a Japanese website. And this is the interview that this all came from right here. It's literally just about the museum, but he talks about Nintendo's IP on the whole and creating a reason for people to choose Nintendo. Games will be part of the big brand. This is Nintendo's IP, but we create something even more appealing. We'd like to imagine a wider variety of things being included. And yeah, while he does say that he thinks it's sad that, their games over time are only available to be played on things like Virtual Console in an official capacity, I think it's just, he's, as Nintendo moves on and as Miyamoto gets older, he's just kind of looking at things as like, for some reason we don't seem to really move on from movies. They're just available all the time on all the modern platforms. Games aren't always like that, and while Nintendo plays a role in that and not allowing some of their ancient games to come out on PC officially and stuff like that, I think the greater context here is he's mostly just talking about the museum and Nintendo's approach to trying to bring people back to the Nintendo brand. And it's very clear the whole point of the message was, hey, to get parents to start thinking when my kid enters first grade, that's maybe a time to get them a Nintendo system. Kind of like when people think about when the right time is to get their kids phones. He wants people to start thinking about Nintendo in that light as well. So anyways, yeah, the full context is obviously not nearly even close to as dire as it's made out to be. But yeah, misinformation it sucks. People are grifting pretty bad right now. And unfortunately, getting away with it because while it's a technically part of a real quote, it's a bad translation, missing context. And what have I said many times? Context matters. And I owe you guys just a smidge of an apology for not providing all of that context yesterday. But to be honest, I was in kind of a time crunch to get the video out. Not an excuse, but here we are today. There's your correction. Also, there's the context for the whole thing. All right, now we got to get to this last one. And this one is one I think that's got a lot of people interested. Because it's, again, you talked about Virtual Console, you know, Miyamoto did. Well, Virtual Console has been redone with their trademarks. Now, this is interesting because Nintendo allowed the trademark to basically expire for Virtual Console. So really, for a few years here, anyone could have claimed that Virtual Console trademark, but nobody did. And now Nintendo has repicked it up. They've actually had this happen before with Virtual Boy. They let Virtual Boy expire. Nobody picked up the trademark. Nintendo eventually took the trademark back and renewed it. And in doing so, now we know Virtual Boy is coming next year. So this has led people to be like, oh, maybe it's happening again. Now, here's what I got to remind you guys before I show you this trademark is things being trademarked don't mean things are going to exist. All right. While I could point to the Virtual Boy as being an example of a trademark being renewed and then a product coming out, and maybe this is another example, we don't know. What I can also point to is hundreds of other trademarks that have been renewed or repicked up after being expired for years, and nothing's happened, right? So got to be very clear. This doesn't mean we're getting Virtual Console. What it does mean is Nintendo has trademarked Virtual Console, which they have to do if they were ever going to bring it back anyways. And this was discovered by Mike Odyssey. So I want to go ahead and give Mike Odyssey complete credit here for paying attention to the trademark scene. And he says, Nintendo just brought back from the dead the Virtual Console name and is currently a pending trademark. Are these signs of a new administration's plan? So he goes into a bunch of different questions he has. But this is basically the image that we're worried about here. Virtual Console, wordmark, Virtual Console, status live, it's pending. Goods and services, recorded electronic game programs, downloadable, yada, yada, you know, basically what Virtual Console is. And the owners of this are Nintendo of America. So this trademark was picked up by NOA just the same way that they did with Virtual Boy. But again, that doesn't mean we're getting Virtual Console, but it doesn't mean we're not getting it either. Because for Virtual Console to come back in any form using that specific name, they would have to renew that trademark. Again, renewing the trademark doesn't mean it's happening, but I know people are getting excited for it. And I think people want it to happen. So this would be step one if it does come back at all. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. All right, guys. I'm Nathaniel Robojans from Nintendo Prime. I want to thank you so much for tuning in to this news video on the lovely day of October 20th. 11 days to go to Halloween, baby. My favorite holiday of the year. We will be in full costume on not this week's episode, but next week's episode. It's going to be our Halloween special on the 29th. We're going to be in full costume and all that. I have no idea what everyone's dressing up as. I know what I'm dressing up as. I have no idea what Eric or anyone else on the show is dressing up as. Maybe I'm the only one that comes dressed up. I have no idea. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll catch you in the next video.